Hey guys, and welcome to another Gotham Knights video. With the game approaching its release date, I wanted to dive into the game's central antagonists. Barring any bait and switches like in Arkham Origins, WB Montreal's last game in the Batman universe, Gotham Knights will revolve around uncovering and defeating the Court of Owls. But who are the Court of Owls? Having been introduced relatively recently in 2012, there aren't many appearances of this villainous group in Batman media. Outside of the comics, they appeared in the Gotham TV show and were the central antagonists of the Batman vs. Robin animated film. But that's about it. But they've quickly established themselves as a core Batman villain with the great addition to his already iconic rogues gallery. Debuting in February 2012 in the Batman run created by Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo, Jonathan Glapion, and Francisco Plasencia, they are the central antagonists of the first two volumes in the New 52 Batman run. This run in the comics will be the basis of this explanation. For those who've seen the Batman vs. Robin film, it's a decent adaptation, but takes liberties and makes changes to the story, so I'll be sticking with the comics. In this story, Bruce Wayne is starting an initiative to invest in the improvement of Gotham and is seeking backers. An individual named Lincoln March shares Bruce's vision and asks for Wayne's vote as March is running for mayor. In Gotham, the Court of Owls are a superstition and the subject of nursery rhymes that have been passed on for ages. The rhyme goes as follows: "Beware the Court of Owls that watches all the time, ruling Gotham from a shadow perch behind granite and lime. They watch you at your hearth, they watch you in your bed. Speak not a whispered word of them, or they'll send the talon for your head." And for those who've never heard of a hearth before like me, it's essentially the floor of a fireplace, basically saying the court sees you in your home, so you better behave. But they're only a superstition, right? At least that's what Batman believes, until he discovers that they are definitely real. The Court of Owls is a secret society composed of Gotham's elite with incredible power and influence over the city, and who've existed and maintained control for hundreds of years. Their appearance often involves well-dressed individuals with a white mask in the shape of an owl's head. As the Waynes contributed to Gotham's development in the 19th century, Alan Wayne, Bruce's great-grandfather, created Wayne Tower, which would stand tall over the city. The court killed Alan Wayne and utilized his trust fund that was meant to support architects, but instead was used for over 150 years to build bases in at least 20 buildings. Additionally, because of the 19th century superstition to avoid building 13th floors, the court would hide their bases in the empty 13th floors of skyscrapers that wouldn't be accessible to the public. Being a centuries-old aristocratic group, they were able to manipulate various levels within the Gotham City government and control the city at all levels. But sometimes an agent of enforcement is needed, and that's where the Talons come in. The Talons are superhuman assassins used by the court to eliminate their enemies. They typically dress in all black with gold-rimmed goggles, and their weapon of choice are ancient throwing knives. Talons contain an element in their blood that essentially makes them immortal. Talons are often groomed from a young age, with one of their suppliers being Haley's Circus. And the story reveals that when Dick Grayson's parents died, Dick was supposed to be taken by the court to be the next Talon, but Bruce's adoption of Dick prevented it. As Batman looks for the court's base, he's abducted by a Talon who then drags Batman into the court's labyrinth. The court made Bruce wander for 8 days in the maze before finding a means of escape, but knowing Batman's identity, the court unleashes hundreds of Talons upon Wayne Manor. Batman lures the Talons into the Batcave and learns that the Talons can't remain conscious in sub-zero temperatures, so he dons a mech suit, freezes the cave, and unleashes on the Talons until they're all defeated. Now, I've summarized the events in this story thus far, but I have to say that this scene is just awesome, and while it was decently adapted in the animated film, I think the comic does it so much better. Bruce then learns that the leader of the Court of Owls was none other than Lincoln March, the mayoral candidate. But March unveils something even more surprising. He claims he's Bruce's forgotten brother, Thomas Wayne Jr. Thomas gives a tragic backstory in which he was born prematurely after a car accident involving a pregnant Martha Wayne. He was then abandoned at a children's hospital and forgotten about. He was then taken in by the Court of Owls and was going to be their means of control of the city. Thomas then dons a costume and proclaims himself to be the Owl Man, the antithesis of Batman because owls are predators of bats. A fight ensues with the building collapsing and Batman escaping, but he sees no signs of Lincoln March. The story ends with us wondering whether Lincoln really was Thomas Wayne Jr., but Bruce's research pointed to the contrary. However, Bruce also acknowledges that without DNA evidence, he could never know for sure. And that is the essential story of the Court of Owls. They later appear in other stories with minor additions to their lore, but with Scott Snyder being consulted in the production of this game's story, it seems like a safe bet that this is the definitive version that will inspire Gotham Knights. Now that we know who the Court of Owls are, I wanted to discuss what I think are non-negotiables for properly representing the Court of Owls. I think any successful iteration of this villainous group has to consist of a few things. First and foremost, they have to be rooted in Gotham's history, from its formation in colonial times all the way to modern Gotham. A group that isn't embedded in the roots of the city isn't really a group worth fearing, because it takes away the sense of hopelessness and fear that the court gives. They have been in control for centuries, and they intend to do so for the foreseeable future. But this is something I expect the game to adhere to. From the free roam gameplay we've seen, the developers did a great job creating a detailed and thorough history for their version of Gotham, so I trust that it'll involve the court having been there from the start, or at least shortly after. The next important facet of the courts is the Wayne connection. Now, I can understand that since Batman is supposedly dead, a personal connection might not matter so much, and honestly, if he truly remains dead, I'll concede that this isn't important. But if Batman happens to be alive, I want the court's history with the Waynes to include the death of Alan Wayne. Furthermore, in the comics, the Court of Owls were the subject of Bruce's first investigation, but not as Batman, but rather as a young boy shortly after his parents' death. Bruce suspected foul play and that there had to have been more to the crime than a simple mugging, and in fact, he nearly solved it all those years ago before meeting a dead end that he wasn't capable of getting past due to his inexperience. The Court of Owls mystery is an important and deeply personal investigation for Bruce, and I think it'd be a missed opportunity not to include this, or represent that in some way. And lastly, I think it's important that the game touch on the fact that Dick Grayson could have been a Talon. In the comics, it's an incredibly emotional moment between Dick and Bruce, as Dick thanks Bruce for saving him from that fate, but Bruce stops him and tells him that he knows Dick and that Dick would never become a Talon, and furthermore that it was Dick Grayson who saved Bruce Wayne. I think this would be an incredible emotional journey to tackle in this game, and would be a missed opportunity, especially when we're going to have the option to play with Nightwing and explore his character development. With that being said, I also wanted to point out that we've seen what seems to be the labyrinth in promotional material so far, and I really hope we get a good amount of time to explore it. I'd love to see our characters struggle and hallucinate in that all-white maze while the court taunts us from above. And I know I've said it many times already, but man, the Court of Owls is fantastic, and I really implore you to check out the comics, because it's an amazing run that I credit for reigniting my interest in comics. I gave you the essential details of the story so that if you knew nothing, you could feel like you had all of the essential going into Gotham Knights. But I deliberately left out enough so that you can experience the story for yourself and be entertained. And that's about all I have for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, as it was a fun one to make. And stay tuned for future Gotham Knights videos. I'm Khalid, and I'll see you guys in the next one.